The sun was low in the sky, painting the horizon with streaks of orange and pink as Clara Bennett guided her horse along the dirt path that led back to Willow Creek. The day had been long, filled with sweat and dust as she worked tirelessly to mend fences on the far edge of her family's ranch. Her hands were calloused from handling tools and her boots were caked with mud, but she didn't mind. Hard work was all she'd ever known since inheriting the ranch after her father's passing 3 years ago. As she rode past the edge of the woods just outside town, something caught her eye. A thin trail of smoke curled lazily into the evening air, rising from a small campfire tucked beneath the shade of an old oak tree. Curious, Clara slowed her horse and squinted through the fading light. Sitting cross-legged by the fire was a man, his hat pulled low over his face. His clothes looked worn, his boots scuffed, and a saddlebag rested beside him. He was strumming a guitar softly, the notes drifting faintly on the breeze. Clara hesitated for a moment. Strangers weren't uncommon in Willow Creek. Travelers often passed through looking for work or a place to rest. But there was something about this man that made her pause. Maybe it was the way he seemed so at ease, like he belonged to the land itself. Or maybe it was the quiet confidence in the way he sat, shoulders relaxed but alert, as if he could sense her presence even before she spoke. "Evenin'," Clara called out, her voice steady despite the unease prickling at the back of her neck. She kept one hand resting lightly on the rifle holstered to her saddle, just in case. The man stopped playing and tilted his head up slightly, revealing sharp cheekbones and piercing blue eyes that seemed to cut right through her. "Evenin'," he replied, his voice smooth and calm like the sound of water flowing over stones. "Didn't mean to startle you." "You didn't," Clara said quickly, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. She nudged her horse closer, stopping a few feet away from him. "What brings you out here?" "Just passing through," he said with a shrug, setting the guitar aside. "Name's Jake Calloway." He extended a hand toward her, though he made no move to stand. Clara studied him for a moment before sliding off her horse and stepping forward to shake his hand. His grip was firm but not overpowering, and his palm was rough, like someone who'd spent years working with his hands. "Clara Bennett," she said. "This is my family's land." Jake nodded, his expression unreadable. "Nice spread you've got here. Looks like it takes some effort to keep it running." "It does," Clara admitted, brushing a strand of dark hair out of her face. "But it's worth it. Keeps me busy." There was a beat of silence between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant chirping of crickets. Jake reached for a canteen lying near his bag and took a sip before offering it to Clara. "Water?" he asked. She hesitated again, then accepted the canteen with a nod of thanks. The water was cool and refreshing, a welcome relief after hours under the hot sun. As she handed it back, she noticed the faint scar running along his jawline, a jagged line that told stories of fights fought and survived. It added to the mystery surrounding him, making her wonder where he'd come from and what he was running from. "So, Jake Calloway," Clara began, leaning casually against her horse. "What exactly are you doing out here? Not many folks choose to camp in the middle of nowhere unless they're hiding from something." Jake chuckled softly, the sound warm and genuine. "Not hiding, ma'am. Just taking my time. Been riding for a while now, seeing places I haven't seen in years. Thought I'd stop here for a spell, maybe find some work if anyone needs an extra pair of hands." Clara raised an eyebrow. "You any good with a hammer? Or a pitchfork?" "I can hold my own," Jake replied with a slight grin. "Done my share of ranch work back in the day. Might be a bit rusty, but I learn quick." "Well, we could always use help around here," Clara said thoughtfully. "Sheriff Harris sometimes hires drifters for odd jobs if you're looking for steady work. Just don't expect much pay." "I'm not picky," Jake assured her. "A roof over my head and food in my belly's plenty for me." They talked for a little while longer, exchanging bits and pieces of their lives. Jake mentioned traveling through Texas and New Mexico, working wherever he could find employment. He spoke of dusty trails, lonely nights, and the freedom of having no ties to hold him down. Clara listened intently, intrigued by his tales of adventure but also sensing a deeper sadness lurking beneath the surface. There was a weight to his words, a heaviness that suggested he wasn't telling her everything. When the sky grew darker and the first stars began to appear, Clara finally mounted her horse. "Well, I'd best get back to town," she said. "Got chores waiting for me tomorrow." Jake stood up, brushing dirt off his jeans. "Thanks for the company and the water," he said, tipping his hat politely. "Maybe I'll see you around." "Maybe," Clara replied with a small smile. As she turned her horse and started riding away, she glanced back once more. Jake was still standing by the fire, watching her go. His silhouette blended seamlessly with the shadows of the trees, and for a brief moment, she felt an inexplicable urge to turn back and ask him more questions. But she shook the feeling off and focused on the road ahead. By the time Clara reached Willow Creek, the streets were quiet, most of the townsfolk already indoors for the night. She tied her horse to the hitching post outside her modest home and headed inside, her mind still lingering on the mysterious cowboy she'd met. Something about him stuck with her, not just his piercing gaze or his easy charm, but the way he carried himself, like a man burdened by secrets, yet determined to keep moving forward. Over the next few days, Clara found herself thinking about Jake more often than she cared to admit. She wondered if he'd stayed in the area or moved on, whether he'd taken her advice and sought work with the sheriff. Part of her hoped he'd stick around, not because she needed another ranch hand, but because she wanted to know more about him. There was a story there buried beneath layers of dust and scars, and Clara couldn't help but feel drawn to uncovering it. Little did she know, Jake Calloway was already weaving himself into the fabric of Willow Creek and into her life, in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Jake Calloway didn't leave Willow Creek like Clara had half expected him to. Instead, he stayed, settling into the rhythm of small-town life with an ease that surprised even himself. He found work quickly, thanks to Sheriff Harris, who was happy to put him on odd jobs around town, fixing broken wagon wheels, helping clear debris after a storm, and even patching up the leaky roof of the church. The townsfolk warmed up to him over time, drawn to his quiet demeanor and willingness to lend a hand wherever it was needed. Clara saw Jake often during those first few weeks. Sometimes their paths crossed by chance, at the general store when she stopped for supplies or at the blacksmith shop where she went to pick up new horseshoes. Other times they ran into each other intentionally, like when Jake showed up at her ranch one morning, offering to help repair a section of fence that had been damaged in a recent windstorm. Clara accepted his offer without hesitation, grateful for the extra pair of hands. As they worked side by side, Clara found herself growing more comfortable around Jake. He wasn't much of a talker, but when he did speak, his words carried weight. He told her stories about places he'd been, the endless deserts of Arizona, the towering mountains of Colorado, the wide-open plains of Montana. Each tale painted a picture of a man who had seen the world, yet chose to keep moving, never staying in one place for too long. But there were gaps in his stories, moments where his voice would trail off or his gaze would drift away as if lost in thought. Clara noticed these silences and wondered what memories haunted him. She wanted to ask but held back, unsure if he'd welcome her curiosity. One afternoon, while they were taking a break from mending fences, Clara finally decided to broach the subject. They sat together under the shade of a large oak tree, sipping water from tin cups and watching the horses graze nearby. The air was warm but not oppressive, filled with the hum of insects and the occasional rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. "You ever think about settling down?" Clara asked suddenly, surprising even herself. "Finding a place to call home?" Jake looked at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment he didn't answer. Then he shrugged and said, "Once upon a time, maybe. But people change. So do circumstances." "What happened?" Clara pressed gently, sensing that she was treading on delicate ground. "If you don't mind me asking." Jake sighed, leaning back against the tree trunk. His eyes seemed distant, focused on something only he could see. "Let's just say I had everything once, a family, land, money, Enough to last 10 lifetimes, but I let it all slip through my fingers because I couldn't hold on to what mattered most. Clara frowned, puzzled. What did you lose? Jake hesitated before answering. When he spoke, his voice was softer, tinged with regret. Love, he said simply. I thought I was invincible, that nothing could touch me. But pride has a way of blinding a man. By the time I realized what I'd thrown away, it was too late. The honesty in his words struck Clara deeply. She'd always assumed Jake was just another drifter, someone content to wander aimlessly through life without ties or responsibilities. But now she saw glimpses of a different man beneath the surface, one who carried scars not just on his body, but on his heart. I'm sorry, she murmured, unsure of what else to say. Jake shook his head, forcing a small smile. Don't be. Life moves on. You learn to live with your mistakes. Or try to, anyway. They sat in silence for a while longer, the weight of Jake's confession hanging between them. Clara felt a strange mix of emotions, sympathy for the pain he'd endured, admiration for his resilience, and something else she couldn't quite name. It unnerved her, this growing connection she felt toward him. So she pushed it aside and focused on practical matters instead. Still, she said after a while, you seem like you're good at fixing things. Maybe you should stick around, here for a while. Lord knows we could use someone like you in Willow Creek. Jake chuckled softly, though there was a hint of sadness in his laugh. Maybe I will, he replied. For now, anyway. Days turned into weeks, and Jake became a familiar presence in Willow Creek. He played his guitar at the saloon on Friday nights, drawing crowds with songs that ranged from lively tunes to haunting ballads. People began to look forward to his performances, finding comfort in the music that seemed to echo their own joys and sorrows. Clara attended every show, sitting at a corner table nursing a glass of lemonade as she listened to him play. One evening, after the crowd had thinned out and the bartender was wiping down tables, Jake approached Clara. He slid into the seat across from her, setting his guitar carefully against the wall. You come here every week, he observed, his tone light but curious. You must really hate my singing. Clara laughed, shaking her head. Not at all, your songs. They remind me of something I can't quite put my finger on. Maybe it's the truth, Jake suggested. Sometimes music says what words can't. Maybe, Clara agreed. After a pause, she added, You ever write your own songs? Jake nodded slowly. A few. Most of them ain't fit for public ears, though. Too raw. I'd like to hear one sometime, Clara said impulsively. If you feel like sharing, that is. Jake studied her for a moment, his blue eyes searching hers. Then he smiled faintly. We'll see. Back at her ranch, Clara found herself thinking about Jake more and more. He was unlike anyone she'd ever met, complex, mysterious, yet disarmingly genuine. There was a part of her that wanted to dig deeper, to uncover the layers of his past and understand the man behind the quiet exterior. But another part of her warned against getting too close. She'd spent years building walls around her heart, determined not to let anyone in after losing her father. Could she risk opening herself up again? Her thoughts were interrupted one morning when she received news that sent a chill down her spine. A wealthy businessman named Victor Lang had arrived in Willow Creek, announcing plans to buy up large portions of land for a massive development project. Word spread quickly among the townsfolk, many of whom felt pressured to sell their properties. Some saw it as an opportunity to escape financial hardship. Others feared being forced out of their homes. Clara knew immediately that Victor's arrival spelled trouble for her ranch. Developers like him cared only about profit, not about preserving the land or supporting the community. Determined to protect her family's legacy, she resolved to fight back, but she also knew she couldn't do it alone. That evening, as she closed the barn door and headed toward the house, she spotted Jake walking along the edge of her property. He waved when he saw her and came over, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a look of concern. Heard about Lang, he said without preamble. Thought you might want some advice. Clara raised an eyebrow. Advice? From a drifter cowboy? Jake smirked. Even drifters know a thing or two about dealing with snakes. She couldn't help but laugh, though the situation was far from funny. All right, Mr. Expert, what's your plan? Jake's expression turned serious. First, don't let him intimidate you. Men like Lang thrive on fear. Second, rally the townsfolk. If everyone stands together, he won't have an easy time dividing and conquering. And third, he hesitated, then added quietly, don't be afraid to ask for help. Clara stared at him, touched by his offer. Why are you doing this? She asked. You barely know me. Jake shrugged, though there was a flicker of emotion in his eyes. Because I've seen what happens when greed takes over, and because, well, let's just say I've got my reasons. Whatever those reasons were, Clara didn't press him for answers. Instead, she nodded gratefully. Thank you, Jake. I mean it. As they stood there in the fading light, the weight of the challenges ahead pressing down on them, Clara realized something important. Jake wasn't just a drifter passing through. He was becoming a part of her life. And perhaps, in ways neither of them fully understood yet, a part of her future. The days that followed Victor Lang's arrival in Willow Creek were tense. The businessman wasted no time making his presence known, setting up meetings with landowners and sweet-talking them into selling their properties. He promised prosperity, jobs, modern amenities, a brighter future, but Clara knew better. She'd heard stories of towns like hers being swallowed whole by developers who cared more about profit than people. Victor's polished suits and smooth words didn't fool her for a second. Clara threw herself into rallying the townsfolk, determined to stand against him. But it wasn't easy. Many families in Willow Creek were struggling to make ends meet, and the idea of selling their land for a quick payday was tempting. Others feared retaliation if they refused. Clara held meetings at the church, urging everyone to hold firm, but doubt lingered in the air like a storm cloud waiting to break. Jake became her constant companion during this time. He attended every meeting, offering advice and encouragement. His calm demeanor helped steady Clara when frustration threatened to overwhelm her, and his practical suggestions gave the group a sense of direction. Slowly but surely, some of the townsfolk began to see Victor for what he truly was, a predator circling wounded prey. Despite Jake's support, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something he wasn't telling her. It gnawed at her, this nagging curiosity about who he really was and why he seemed so invested in protecting Willow Creek. One evening, after another long day of strategizing and arguing with stubborn neighbors, she decided to confront him. They were sitting on the porch of Clara's house, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky burned with hues of orange and purple, casting long shadows across the yard. Jake leaned back in his chair, one leg crossed over the other, while Clara fidgeted with the hem of her shirt. You've been awfully helpful these past few days, she said finally, breaking the silence. Jake glanced at her, his expression unreadable. Just trying to do my part. Why? Clara asked bluntly. What's in it for you? Jake didn't answer right away. He stared out at the field stretching beyond the fence, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. For a moment, Clara thought he might brush off her question or change the subject. Instead, he sighed deeply and turned to face her. I told you before, I've seen what happens when men like Victor come around. They destroy everything good just to line their pockets. I don't want that for Willow Creek. That's not all, though, is it? Clara pressed. Her voice softened. There's something else. Something you're hiding. Jake hesitated, then nodded slowly. Yeah, there is. Clara waited, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure what she expected him to say, but nothing could have prepared her for the truth. My real name isn't just Jake Calloway, he began, his voice low and steady. It's Jacob Calloway III. My family owns, well, let's just say we own a lot of land. Half the state, give or take. Clara's eyes widened in disbelief. Half the state, you're serious? Dead serious, Jake replied. We've got cattle ranches, oil fields, timber operations, you name it. Lang's proposal overlaps. with some of our holdings here in Willow Creek. That's why I came back, to see what he was up to. But why didn't you tell anyone? Clara demanded, her shock giving way to anger. You let us think you were just some drifter. You lied to us. I didn't lie, Jake said firmly. I just didn't tell the whole truth. And yeah, maybe that makes me a coward, but I had my reasons. I walked away from all that years ago because I couldn't stand the greed and corruption. I wanted to live simply, without the weight of expectations or responsibility. But when I heard about Lang's plans, I knew I couldn't sit idly by. This place, it matters to me, to you, and I couldn't let him ruin it. Clara stared at him, torn between outrage and understanding. Part of her wanted to lash out, to accuse him of betrayal, but another part of her recognized the sincerity in his words. He hadn't come to Willow Creek to exploit it. He'd come to protect it. Still, the deception stung. So what now? She asked quietly. Are you planning to swoop in and save the day with your fancy name and deep pockets? No, Jake said quickly. That's not how this works. I'm not here to throw money at the problem. I'm here to help however I can, to fight alongside you, not above you. If anything, my resources can buy us some time. Lawyers, paperwork, that kind of thing. But the fight itself belongs to the people of Willow Creek, not me. His answer surprised her. She'd expected arrogance, entitlement even, but instead he sounded humble, resolute, determined to earn her trust rather than demand it. All right, Clara said after a long pause. But you'd better mean what you're saying, Jake, or should I call you Jacob? He winced slightly at the use of his full name. Just Jake is fine, always has been. Fine, Clara repeated. But if you're going to stick around, you'd better be ready to prove yourself. No more secrets. No more secrets, Jake agreed solemnly. With Jake's true identity revealed, things began to shift in Willow Creek. News of his connection to the Calloway Empire spread quickly, and opinions were divided. Some townsfolk felt betrayed, accusing him of manipulating them from the start. Others saw his involvement as a blessing, believing his wealth and influence would tip the scales in their favor. Clara did her best to mediate, reminding everyone that Jake, or Jacob, wasn't the enemy. Victor Lang was. Victor himself grew increasingly agitated as resistance mounted. His initial charm offensive gave way to thinly veiled threats. He sent representatives to intimidate hesitant landowners, promising financial ruin if they refused to sell. When that didn't work, his men resorted to sabotage, cutting fences, poisoning livestock, vandalizing property. Tensions escalated and fear began to creep into the hearts of many. One night, as Clara checked on her cattle before heading to bed, she noticed something strange. A group of shadowy figures moved silently through the pasture, carrying tools and equipment. Her stomach clenched with dread. Without hesitation, she grabbed her rifle and ran toward the barn where Jake had been staying. Jake, she whispered urgently, shaking him awake. Wake up, we've got trouble. Jake bolted upright, instantly alert. What is it? Intruders, Clara hissed. Out in the field. Looks like they're trying to cut the water lines. Jake grabbed his boots and jacket, following her outside. Together they crept toward the edge of the property, keeping low to avoid detection. Sure enough, 3 men were busy tampering with the irrigation system, their flashlights casting eerie beams across the dark landscape. What do we do? Clara murmured, gripping her rifle tightly. We stop them, Jake replied grimly. Carefully. They split up, circling around to flank the intruders. Clara fired a warning shot into the air, startling the men. Get off my land! She shouted. The intruders froze, caught off guard. One of them reached for a weapon, but Jake stepped out of the shadows, leveling his own gun at them. Don't even think about it, he warned. Faced with no other option, the men raised their hands and backed away. Jake kept his weapon trained on them while Clara called the sheriff. Within minutes, flashing lights illuminated the field as deputies arrived to arrest the trespassers. As the commotion died down, Clara turned to Jake, her face pale but resolute. This isn't over, she said. Lang won't stop until he gets what he wants. I know, Jake replied, his voice heavy with determination. And neither will we. Over the next few days, Jake used his connections to strengthen the town's defenses. He hired private security to patrol the area, ensuring no further attacks went unnoticed. He also brought in lawyers to review Victor's contracts, exposing loopholes and violations that undermined the developer's claims. Meanwhile, Clara continued to rally the townsfolk, reminding them of the importance of unity. Through it all, their bond deepened. Clara found herself relying on Jake more and more, trusting him in ways she never thought possible after learning the truth about his past. And Jake, for his part, realized just how much Clara meant to him. She wasn't just a woman fighting to save her home. She was someone who inspired him to be better, to care again. Late one night, as they sat together under the stars, Jake broke the silence. "Clara," he said softly, "there's something I need to say." She looked at him, her brow furrowing. "What is it?" "I haven't loved anyone in a long time," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not since I lost everything. But being here with you, it's made me realize what I've been missing. You've given me a reason to hope again." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She opened her mouth to respond, but words failed her. Instead, she reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. For the first time in years, both of them felt a glimmer of peace, a fragile but undeniable promise of something new beginning to bloom. The battle against Victor Lang intensified as the weeks dragged on. Willow Creek became a battleground of wills, with Clara and Jake leading the charge. While Jake's resources provided much-needed support, lawyers scrutinizing contracts, private security patrolling the town, the fight was far from over. Victor wasn't one to back down easily. He retaliated with increasing aggression, sending more men to harass the townsfolk and spreading rumors meant to sow discord. One particularly tense afternoon, Clara stood in front of a crowd gathered at the church hall. The room buzzed with nervous energy as people whispered among themselves. Some were scared, others were angry. A few had already caved under pressure, selling their land to Victor's company. Clara clenched her fists at her sides, trying to keep her emotions in check as she addressed the group. "We can't give up," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "If we let him take even one piece of this town, he'll take it all. We've got to stand together." Jake stood near the back of the room, arms crossed, watching Clara with quiet admiration. She'd grown into her role as the town's unofficial leader, speaking with a confidence that inspired others to follow her lead. But Jake also saw the toll this fight was taking on her. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and there was a weariness in her movements that hadn't been there before. After the meeting ended, Clara stepped outside to catch a breath of fresh air. Jake joined her moments later, leaning against the railing of the church steps. "You're doing good work," he said, his tone warm but cautious. "People are starting to believe in this fight because of you." Clara sighed heavily, shaking her head. "It doesn't feel like enough. Every time we think we've got an edge, Victor finds a way to push back harder. What if we lose, Jake? What if all this effort is for nothing?" Jake reached out and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're not going to lose, not while I'm here. I made a promise to help protect this place. And you. And I mean to keep it." His words brought a small measure of comfort, but Clara couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get worse. And she was right. That night, chaos erupted in Willow Creek. Victor's men struck again, this time targeting the heart of the town. They set fire to several barns on the outskirts, including one belonging to Clara's closest neighbor, an elderly farmer named Mr. Peterson. Flames lit up the sky, casting an ominous orange glow over the fields. The sound of panicked animals and shouting voices filled the air as townsfolk rushed to contain the blaze. Clara arrived just in time to see Jake sprinting toward the burning barn, ignoring the danger. Inside, she knew, were livestock trapped by the flames. Without hesitation, she followed him, grabbing buckets of water from a nearby well to douse the fire. "Jake!" she yelled above the roar of the inferno. "Get out of there!" "I'm fine," he shouted back, his voice steady despite the heat searing his skin. "Just keep pouring water on the walls." Together, they worked tirelessly alongside other volunteers, forming a human chain to pass buckets back and forth. It took hours, but eventually, they managed to extinguish the flames. By the time the fire was under control, everyone was exhausted, covered in soot and sweat. The barn was gutted, its charred remains standing as a grim reminder of Victor's ruthlessness. As Clara surveyed the damage, tears welled up in her eyes. She turned to Jake, who looked equally drained. "This has gone too far," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "He's trying to break us, Jake, to make us afraid." "Well, it won't work," Jake replied, his jaw set in determination. "Every act of destruction only makes us stronger. People are seeing now what kind of man Victor really is. He's making enemies out of everyone." Clara nodded, though doubt still lingered in her mind. "But how long can we keep this up? How many more nights like this will we have to endure?" "As long as it takes," Jake said simply. "We don't stop until Victor does." The next morning, Jake decided it was time to take a more direct approach. He arranged a meeting with Victor, hoping to confront him face to face. Clara insisted on going along, unwilling to let Jake face the businessman alone. They met at the saloon where Victor sat at a corner table surrounded by his entourage. His sharp suit and polished shoes contrasted sharply with the rugged simplicity of Jake and Clara. When they approached, Victor smirked, clearly amused by their audacity. Well, he drawled, leaning back in his chair, "if it isn't Jacob Calloway III himself. Or should I say, Jake the Drifter?" "Cut the games, Victor," Jake snapped, his patience wearing thin. "You know why we're here?" Victor raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "Do I? Enlighten me." "You've been terrorizing this town long enough," Clara interjected, stepping forward. Her voice was firm, unwavering. "Your thugs burned down barns last night. You've tried to scare people into selling their land, but it ends. Now," Victor chuckled darkly, his gaze shifting between them. "Oh, I'm terrified, truly. Tell me, Jake, how does it feel to ride back into town after abandoning your family name? Did you honestly think you could waltz in here and play hero?" "This isn't about me," Jake growled. "It's about these people. About protecting what's theirs. Your schemes won't work anymore. We've exposed your dirty deals, and the law's on our side now." Victor's smile faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered, leaning forward with a predatory gleam in his eye. "You think you've got the upper hand? Let me remind you of something, Jake. Money talks. Power wins. And trust me, you haven't seen the half of what I'm capable of." Before Jake could respond, Clara stepped closer, her expression fierce. "Then bring it on. Because no matter what you throw at us, we'll be ready. This town doesn't bow to bullies like you." For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then Victor stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. "You two have made your choice," he said coldly. "Don't say I didn't warn you." With that, he turned and walked away, his men trailing behind him. Clara exhaled sharply, realizing she'd been holding her breath. Jake placed a steadying hand on her arm. "He's bluffing," Jake said quietly. "Trying to rattle us." "Maybe," Clara replied, "but he's dangerous. We need to stay vigilant." Back at Clara's ranch later that evening, the weight of the confrontation settled over them. They sat together on the porch, staring out at the twilight sky streaked with hues of pink and gold. The beauty of the scene offered a stark contrast to the ugliness they'd faced earlier. "What happens now?" Clara asked softly, breaking the silence. "We keep fighting," Jake answered without hesitation. "For every step he takes forward, we push him back twice as hard. That's how we win." Clara glanced at him, studying his profile. There was a resolve in his eyes, a strength that reassured her even in the darkest moments. "Why are you doing this, Jake?" "Really?" Jake hesitated, then turned to meet her gaze. "Because of you," he admitted. "When I came here, I thought I was done with all this. Done with responsibility, done with fighting. But then I met you, and everything changed. You reminded me what it means to care about something bigger than myself. What it means to love someone. Clara felt her heart skip a beat. Love. The word hung in the air between them, unspoken yet undeniable. She opened her mouth to respond, but Jake continued before she could find the words. I know I messed up, he said. I lied to you, kept secrets. I don't blame you for being mad, but I swear to you, Clara, I'm not walking away this time. Not from you, not from Willow Creek. If you'll let me, I want to stay, to build something real with you. Tears pricked at the corners of Clara's eyes, but she blinked them away, smiling faintly. You better mean it, Jake Calloway. No, more running off. I mean it, he promised, reaching out to take her hand. No more running. As they sat there, fingers intertwined, the tension of the past weeks began to ease. For the first time in what felt like forever, Clara allowed herself to hope, not just for victory over Victor Lang, but for something deeper, something lasting. Together, they had faced fire and fury, and somehow they'd emerge stronger. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side. The final showdown between Willow Creek and Victor Lang came sooner than anyone expected. After the confrontation at the saloon, Victor grew desperate. His plans to buy up the town's land were unraveling, thanks to Jake's legal team exposing his shady contracts and Clara's relentless efforts to unite the townsfolk. Cornered and furious, Victor decided to escalate his tactics. He sent a group of hired men to intimidate Jake and Clara directly, hoping to force them into submission. It happened late one night when the town was quiet, its streets empty under the pale glow of the moon. Clara had just finished securing the barn doors when she heard the sound of approaching footsteps. Her heart raced as she turned to see several figures emerging from the shadows, their faces obscured by hats and scarves. Instinctively, she reached for the rifle slung over her shoulder. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. One of the men stepped forward, his tone mocking. "Just a friendly visit, Miss Bennett. Mr. Lang sends his regards." Before they could take another step, Jake appeared from the house, his own gun drawn. "You're trespassing," he said firmly, positioning himself protectively in front of Clara. "Leave now or you'll regret it." The men laughed, clearly unimpressed. "Big talk for a drifter," one of them sneered. "But we ain't. Leave until we get what we came for." Clara tightened her grip on her rifle, her eyes scanning the group. There were 5 of them, too many to handle alone, but she refused to back down. Beside her, Jake stood tall, his stance unwavering. The tension crackled like lightning in the air. "This is your last chance," Jake warned, his voice low and dangerous. "Walk away or deal with the consequences." For a moment, no one moved. Then, without warning, one of the men lunged forward. Chaos erupted as Jake and Clara fought to defend themselves. Shots rang out, echoing across the fields, but neither side was willing to give ground. Jake tackled one man to the ground while Clara fired a warning shot that sent another retreating into the darkness. The fight ended almost as quickly as it began. Outnumbered but determined, Jake and Clara managed to drive off the attackers, leaving behind only scuffed boots and scattered debris. As the dust settled, Clara leaned against the porch railing, breathing heavily, her hands trembling around the rifle. "You okay?" Jake asked, his voice soft but urgent. Clara nodded, though her legs felt weak beneath her. "Yeah, just, shaken." Jake placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "They won't come back tonight. Not after that." "But they will eventually," Clara replied grimly. "Victor's not going to stop until he gets what he wants." Jake didn't argue. He knew she was right. But something in his expression told Clara he had a plan. The next morning, Jake called an emergency meeting at the church hall. Every resident of Willow Creek showed up, their faces etched with worry but also determination. Word of the attack on Clara's ranch had spread quickly and the townsfolk were ready to fight back. "We can't keep playing defense," Jake began, addressing the crowd. "Victor's got resources, but so do we. We've got something he doesn't, each other. Together we can end this once and for all." He outlined a bold strategy, a coordinated effort to expose Victor's crimes publicly, rallying support from neighboring towns and media outlets. With evidence gathered by his lawyers and first-hand accounts from victims of Victor's intimidation tactics, They would make sure the truth couldn't be ignored. Clara spoke next, her voice filled with conviction. We've been scared long enough. It's time to stand up and show Victor that we're not afraid. This is our home and we're not letting him take it from us. Her words ignited a spark in the room. People cheered, volunteering their help however they could. For the first time since Victor arrived, hope replaced fear. Over the following days, the plan unfolded with precision. Flyers were distributed, detailing Victor's illegal activities. Local newspapers published exposés, shining a spotlight on his corrupt practices. Neighboring towns joined the cause, sending supplies and volunteers to support Willow Creek. Even state officials took notice, launching investigations into Victor's business dealings. Victor, realizing the tide was turning against him, tried to counterattack. He held press conferences, spinning lies about being misunderstood and accusing Jake and Clara of orchestrating a smear campaign. But his words fell flat. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and public opinion had shifted, decisively in favor of Willow Creek. Finally, the day came when authorities arrived in town to arrest Victor and his associates. Clara and Jake watched from the sidelines as sheriff's deputies led Victor away in handcuffs, his face red with fury and humiliation. The townsfolk erupted in cheers, hugging each other and celebrating their hard-fought victory. As the commotion died down, Clara turned to Jake, a wide smile spreading across her face. "We did it," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "It's over." Jake nodded, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Yeah, we did. And I couldn't have done it without you." In the weeks that followed, Willow Creek began to heal. Damaged properties were repaired, fences rebuilt, and spirits lifted. The threat of Victor Lang was gone, and the town felt lighter, freer. Jake stayed true to his promise, using his family's resources to invest in sustainable projects that benefited everyone. He helped modernize irrigation systems, fund community programs, and create jobs that allowed people to thrive without compromising the land they loved. Clara and Jake's relationship deepened as well. No longer burdened by secrets or fears, they embraced the future together. They spent evenings sitting on the porch of Clara's ranch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Their conversations ranged from dreams for the future to reflections on the past, each word strengthening the bond between them. One evening, as they stood together overlooking the fields, Jake took Clara's hand in his. "I never thought I'd find a place like this again," he said softly. "Or someone like you." Clara smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Funny, I was thinking the same thing. You came here looking for a fresh start, but I think you found something even better." "Love," Jake murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "And a reason to stay." Clara looked up at him, her heart full. "Then stay. Build something with me here. Something real." "I already am," Jake replied, kissing her gently. "With you." As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Clara and Jake stood side by side, arms wrapped around each other. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but they faced it, together, with courage, resilience, and love. Willow Creek wasn't just a town anymore. It was a symbol of hope, unity, and second chances. And for Clara and Jake, it was home.